I'll definitely get her when she starts crying.
When you notice that she's being a distraction, then you can get her. B'ezrat Hashem. Alright, so maybe before we start the third Kuzari class today, we'll just make a note that this class is Leilu Nishmat, the martyrs of the Jewish people who were killed in the last few days, and also for all the other neshamas of the Jewish people, as well as for the continued success of our soldiers, B'ezrat Hashem, people who are putting their lives on the line, literally for the Jewish people. We'll make a short Misha Barach for them, B'ezrat Hashem. You should answer Amen. Yishem Adonai Borach Ma'ata Adonai Misha Barach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov Moshe Aaron David Shlomo Yivarech et Chayalei Israel העומדים על משמר ארצנו והרי אלוהינו מגבול הלבנון ועד מדבר מצרים ומן הים הגדול עד הערבה ביבשה באוויר ובים ובכללם תלמידי יאירו דק יצחק יצחק חמצי מישה אהרון הכהן ייתן אדוני את אויבינו הקמים עלינו נגפים לפניהם הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור ויציל את חיילינו מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה ישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם ילבר שונאים תחתיהם ויעטרם בחדש שעה ועטנגת ניצחון וכאן בהם הכתוב כי אדוני אלוהיכם ההולך עמכם להילחם נחם אביכם נושיע אתכם ונאמר אמן.
Amen.
I have students who are out there. So let's just pray that they're all safe and sound. We're on page 47. We're actually going to start the book of the Kuzari. Thank God. I'd like to just make a note before we begin to actually learn the book inside. There's a danger when it comes to learning certain ideas. You have to be real. You have to be honest. The moment we start discussing Judaism from the roots up, we're opening up a can of worms. Not so much because there are worms in the can, but because we sometimes will end off in the middle of a paragraph. We'll end off in the middle of an idea. We'll have to continue a week later. And that can be a little bit dangerous sometimes because we're in the middle of a question, we're trying to figure something out. And therefore the condition of studying this kind of Torah always has to be in the words of the Sefer HaYetzirah, the Kabbalistic book that's written either by Adam HaRishon or by Avraham Avinu, one of the two. The Sefer HaYetzirah says, Imrat Simcha, when your heart starts to run, Shuv al HaMekor, come back to what you know is true. We know that Hashem is one, the Torah is true, and that's where we always have to come back to. We always have to run back to the fact that Torah is from heaven, that Hashem exists, and therefore, B'ezrat Hashem, at the end of our class today and every time that we learn from the book inside, we're going to stop for a few moments. I'll hand out a sheet, and we'll be mekabel on ourselves. We'll accept upon ourselves the kingdom of heaven, B'ezrat Hashem. That being said, let's look inside. This is exciting, everybody. Oh Hashem. Come closer.
Share the book. Go.
On page 47, we start this book of the Kuzari. If you'll notice, perhaps, before we start, on the third page of our book, on the third page of the book, you'll find a page that's all in Hebrew. It's after the title page, like one page afterwards, or 2 pages after. Yeah, you see it says Sefer Kuzari in Hebrew. On the right hand it has the copyright information. So we're not looking at the copyright information. If you're a librarian from Congress, you can check it out yourself. The Sefer Kuzari, this is the original cover from Vilna in 1905 of the Kuzari edition that was printed, the more modern edition in Hebrew. And it says here, you'll see on top, there's a name, Rabbi Yitzchak HaSanagori. This Rabbi Yitzchak is assumed to be the rabbi who was actually alive in the story of Rabbi Yoni Halevy in the Kuzari. Next you have the name Rabbi Yehuda Halevi HaSfaradi, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi from Spain. Yeah, a few lines down. And there you see that we say the story was actually transcribed, was written down by Rabbi Yehuda Halevy. And then the third name here, Rabbi Yehuda ibn Tibon, is the translator of this work from the original Arabic to the Hebrew which we're studying today. Which is why it's very important that we all have the same book, because in any English translation you'll use is not a translation of the original work. Rather, it's a translation of a translation from Arabic. Arabic translated to Hebrew. Hebrew in different variations of Hebrew because there were different Arabic to Hebrew translations. And then we end up in an English version. So if you're using an English translation that's of a different Hebrew translation, you may not actually be learning the same book that we're learning. So it's very important that we all have the same book, B'ezrat Hashem.
I have this book in Russian.
Okay, see? So it's even one step further. B'ezrat Hashem. So we're going back now to the words of Rabbi Yehuda Halevy himself. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevy is going to set the scene for us. Where are we? What are we? What are we doing here? We'll learn this together. You can follow along in the Hebrew or the English. I'll read in Hebrew. I'll translate in my own English. But you can feel free to follow along. Sha'ol sha'alu oti. This is Rabbi Yehuda Halevy. I was asked, Al ma sheyesh iti min ha'ta'anot v'atshuvot. What answers I have to the different questions and criticisms. Al ha'cholkim aleinu min ha'filosofim v'anshei ha'torot. In regard to the questions of the different philosophers and the different Anshe HaTorot, people with other Torahs, meaning other religions. What questions they have on us? Val haminim hacholkim al hamon Israel, and the minim. The minim are an interesting group. They're not exactly known. There's no specific translation of minim. Minim is any other group that left traditional Judaism, but they're Jews. For example, the early Christians were known as minim. And the Karaites, yeah, and the Karaites also, those who rejected the oral tradition but accepted the written tradition, we also refer to them very often as minim. It's probably those minim that Rabbi Yehuda Halevy is referring to, that connection between the written Torah and the oral Torah. As Rachel pointed out, we have in our prayer book, there should be no hope, not only for those who report us to the foreign governments, but also to the minim, to these, come closer, to these dissidents from Judaism, if you'd like to call them that. Because not only did they leave Judaism, but they tried to attract other people to join with them. They always tried to pull people into their grasp. That was their thing. Their thing was to attack Judaism so that Judaism would feel foreign to those people who really followed true and traditional Judaism. And therefore Rabbi Yehuda Halevy is saying here that all I'm trying to do right now is to answer the questions. There are so many questions. There are so many different ideas. There are so many problems that people try to throw at Judaism. Rabbi Yehuda Halevy says people have come to me and they've asked me for answers. The people have turned to me as the rabbi perhaps of that generation to answer the questions. And this idea of debates between Jewish scholars and other scholars, they existed in Rabbi Yehuda Halevy's time period. And as we said before, Rabbi Yehuda Halevy didn't really care so much to debate. He was just answering the questions of his own community, the people who approached him. That's what he says. The only reason I'm writing this book is because I was asked to. I was asked by the people who live in my time, by the people in my community. They asked me to teach them the truth. And that's what I'm trying to do. Before we go further, we'll need to read the next paragraph as well. He says, "V'zacharti ma sheshma'ativ kvar," and this made me remember different things that I've already heard. Mita'anot hechaver, from the arguments of that famous rabbi. Asher haya etzel melech Kuzar, which was in the time of the king of Kuzar, and he was discussing with the king of Kuzar. Hanichnas bedat haYehudim hayom karba ma'ot shana. That same king who converted to Judaism 400 years ago from today. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda Halevy is already telling you, I didn't live in that generation. I'm just sharing with you a story about that generation. Kasher niskar v'noda b'sifrei divrei yamim, which is already famous and recorded in the writings of the historians of that generation. There are a few famous letters from Arabic historians, as well as from Rabbi Chisda ibn Shuprat, who was one of the big rabbis who wanted to come and live in the Kuzari kingdom. He wanted to leave his job as a chief rabbi somewhere and join this kingdom, even though it wasn't in Israel, because he felt like it was such a revelation, such a breath of fresh air. There was a Jewish community, even though they were in Russia, that followed a completely Jewish lifestyle. And he wanted to go. And we see that these stories are already recorded in the writings of history. But we know, as we've said before, that Rabbi Yehuda Halevy is not a historian. He wasn't trying here to record exactly what they said 400 years before. It doesn't really interest Rabbi Yehuda Halevy so much. He's not writing here a story that's accurate with history. Rather, what Rabbi Yehuda Halevy is trying to do is to write a book of Jewish philosophy and fit it into a story that everybody knows. Everybody knew the story of the king, and he brought in a philosopher and a Muslim and a Christian. Everyone knows the story, and therefore what Rabbi Yehuda Halevy is trying to do is just to write a book in the form of probably what did that discussion sound like between the rabbi and the king of Kuzar. Before we go further into the book, We just can't keep moving until we have a few things down straight. Maybe these aren't things that are important to write down. The three basic principles and assumptions that we have to know when we learn the next few pieces in this book. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'hakol nהיה b'dvaro.
Amen.
It's also a basic assumption that Hashem created the world, right? But that's not one of the three. The first principle, assumption, however you want to call it, Rabbi Yehuda Halevy is about to start the story. This king of Kuzari has that famous dream. Your thoughts, your desires, Hashem likes them, appreciates them, but your actions, king of Kuzari, the idols that you worship, that's not the way that Hashem wants you to get close to him. So the king of Kuzari sets out on a journey to discover something that's real, something that's true, something that resonates with his heart. So what does he do? He calls in a Greek philosopher. And after the Greek philosopher, he calls in a Christian. And after the Christian, he calls in a Muslim. And the reason why he didn't call in a Jew first was because he felt that the Jews were this downtrodden, despised people. If they were right, if the truth was with them, then I wouldn't need to call them in because the whole world would believe in their truth. He said, look at the way they're treated in the world. They don't have their own country. They're being, killed and massacred in different countries. They're thrown out of one nation to the next nation. And only later does he reach the Jewish rabbi, and that's the rest of the book, pretty much. And the question is asked, if everything I've told you until today for the last 2 weeks is true, the Rabbi Yehuda Halevy isn't really sitting here and trying to teach Torah to the world. He isn't trying to convince the world that Hashem exists and that Judaism is right. He doesn't really care about the world. Rabbi Yehuda Halevy is answering the questions of the Jewish people. So why does he even bother with the first few people? Why does he bother with the philosopher, with the Christian, with the Muslim? Maybe if it's just a consideration, there are people who are sitting behind you, just scoot back every once in a while so they can actually see. No, it's not a problem. Just when you're right, it's one thing. So, why bother? Why bother teaching us about these things, especially if we know that Rabbi Yehuda Halevy won't go so much in depth into the different religions? He's just mentioning them as part of his story. And this is our first principle and assumption. Rabbi Yehuda Halevy is painfully aware that the Jewish people don't live in their homeland. Rabbi Yehuda Halevy is aware that the Jewish people don't live in a Jewish society. They haven't experienced Jewish culture for hundreds of years. They haven't known what it's like to have a Jewish leadership, one that follows the Torah and keeps the mitzvot. And therefore Rabbi Yehuda Halevy says, even though I don't care so much about the philosophers, I'm not trying to answer the criticisms of the Christians. I'm not here to deal with the problems of the Muslims. But I have to be real. The Jewish people are influenced by Greek philosophy. The Jewish people have been influenced by the religion of Christianity. The Jewish people have been influenced by the way of life of the Muslims. And therefore I'm not trying to deal with their issues, but I'm trying to deal with the issues that exist inside of my own people. The influences, the foreign influences that have already infiltrated, that have already penetrated that stronghold of Judaism and added different strange ideologies into the Jewish people. Rabbi Yehuda Halevy perhaps is treating this issue like one who has a child. You send your child to school. When they come back from school, they heard, a bad word. They heard something that they don't need to be repeating at home. Now, our job as a parent isn't to go to school and to beat up that kid. That's not our job. It's not my kid. That's the teacher's job. That's the parent's job. But my job is to make sure that my child knows what's right and knows what's wrong. And part of doing that is to deal with the issue at hand. I can't just ignore it. I can't pretend that it's not there. I have to deal with the issue at hand. And that's our first principle. Rabbi Yehuda Halevy deals with these issues not for the world. Not to convince Christians that they're wrong or Muslims that they should change their beliefs. But his reasoning for sharing these ideas is to show the Jewish people the truth. In Hebrew we call it hitmodedut betoch habayit. He's dealing with the issues that are inside of his house, inside of the Jewish people. Our second assumption, our second principle. Rabbi Yehuda Halevy makes it sound like all he's doing is recording a story that happened 400 years ago. That's what I'm just writing the story so you can have it in a book, so you can study it, so you can see what the rabbi spoke with the king of Kuzari about. The truth is that we know that the story is not necessarily accurate. We know that Rabbi Yoni Halevy isn't trying to record every word, and it's not really possible that he could have. 400 years is a really long time. To remember a discussion that happened 400 years ago is something that would require a serious group of individuals who are dedicated to this conversation, which we don't find any record of. Furthermore, if people already knew this discussion, they knew what happened between the king and the rabbi, then there would have already been earlier versions of the story in writing, but we don't find those earlier versions. And therefore we know that Rabbi Yoni Halevy is kind of writing the story in his own fashion, his own style, with his own ideas. And not so much to guess what the rabbi and the king were talking about. Does he really care? No, what's he trying to do? He's trying to pass on his message of Torah to us in the famous story. Well, if that's true, then why is Rabbi Yoni Halevy lying to us at the beginning of the book? Why does he tell us, oh, I'm here to record a story that happened 400 years ago? What do I care about the story that happened 400 years ago? Make up your own story, a king, a rabbi. Why do you have to use this story? It's very simple. Rabbi Yoni Halevy was a poet. He was a rabbi. He was a singer. He wasn't a historian. He never claimed to be. He never intended to be. Rabbi Yoni Halevy writes in the end of this piece, in section 5, if you'll see here, in the next page, on page 48, in paragraph 5. His hopefully perceptive readers will gain much understanding for them. V'hamaskilim yavinu, in Hebrew. When he speaks about perceptive readers, he's speaking about us. He says, listen, you can either believe that this is some fairy tale, or you can realize with your perception that there are deeper ideas in this book. I'm not just trying to share with you a story, I'm trying to teach you Torah. So why is Rabbi Yoni Halevy telling us the story? For two reasons. One, you'll find that many rabbis, in the introductions to their book, will say, I didn't write anything in this book for my own. Everything here is just something that I heard before. Other rabbis wrote it before me, people who are greater than me. Why would a rabbi write in that kind of style? That was a question. Humility. I don't want to sit here, oh, I'm writing a whole new book on Jewish philosophy. I made it all up. Rabbi Yoni Halevy was a humble person. He says, listen, I'm just sharing with you ideas that were here way before me. I'm just writing it down. He's trying just to take the spotlight off of him. He doesn't want the fame. He doesn't want the honor. He just wants to share Torah. You'll find a similar thing with the Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, in his introduction to the Klach Pitrei Chochmah, to the 138 paths of Kabbalah. You'll find that the Ramchal says the same thing. I just wrote the commentary of this book. I didn't actually write the book. The truth is the Ramchal wrote both the book and the commentary. He just didn't want to take credit for the book. So he just says, I wrote the commentary on the book. You'll find the same thing maybe closer to home. In the Tanya of Chabad, in the cover page of the Tanya, and in the introduction, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, writes, I didn't write anything of my own in this book. You'll notice if you go look again. I just collected ideas that were here way before me. But we know that the Tanya is one of the most fundamental books of Chassidut. It was the Alter Rebbe's whole Torah that he was putting in book format. So why didn't he say that? Because he was a humble person. It's not new that a rabbi would write a book and tell you, I didn't really write everything in this book. But the second, perhaps most important idea is the fact that Rabbi Yoni Halevy is trying to tell you, I didn't make this stuff up. This is not my own original ideas. I'm teaching you Torah that existed way before me. 400 years ago they knew this Torah. What was 400 years before Rabbi Yoni Halevy? What was going on in the Jewish world at the time? There was a period of rabbis known as the Tanaim. Who were the Tanaim? They wrote which book?
Mishnah.
The Mishnah, right? The authors of the Mishnah. Later on, you had a group of rabbis called the Amoraim. What did they write?
Gemara.
The Gemara. What is the Gemara? It's a commentary on
Mishnah.
the Mishnah, right? Every generation, the earlier you get, the more authoritative they were. And an Amorah, someone from the Talmud, couldn't argue on somebody in the Mishnah because they lived before him. They were closer to the source of oral tradition than them, and they don't argue with what the rabbis in the generations before them said. Right after we sealed the Talmud in Bavel, in our exile, that ended the time called the Amoraim, and we entered a world of people who were known as the
Savran.
Geonim.
Femot.
Very
Say it again.
Savran.
Savoaim, right? Savoaim mean those who were thinking. What does that really mean? Savu. It means they weren't really sure if they were still writing the Talmud or if they were a new generation of rabbis. And therefore their words are kind of quasi-Talmud, quasi the next generation. We're not really sure. And when we need them to be rabbis from the Talmud, we make them rabbis from the Talmud. When we don't need them, we make them a rabbi of a later generation. That period lasted for a very short amount of time. It's why you probably don't know any of the Savoaim. And immediately we started a tkufa, a generation called the Geonim. The Geonim, literally the geniuses, but those were the rabbis who realized that it's really hard to study Gemara. And this is thousands of years ago. It's hard to study Gemara. Imagine what it's like today. And the Geonim decided to write books that would make the Gemara easier to understand. The rabbis of people like the Rambam, of Rashi, those were Geonim. And after the Geonim passed away, that generation of rabbis, we entered a period in history known as the Rishonim, the early rabbis. That was already in the medieval times. Most of the rabbis you know come from that generation. The Rambam, Rashi, the Ramban, the Rif, the Ran, Sforno, the Ibn Ezra, all the Rabbi Yoni Halevy, they all lived in the generation known as the time of the Rishonim. A few hundred years later, and there's a reason why I'm sharing the Jewish history, a few hundred years later, the time of the Rishonim ended, and Rabbi Yosef Cairo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, was the last Rishon, and the first Achron. Achron means the later rabbis. The Acharonim. Those rabbis include, the first of them was Rabbi Moshe Isserlish, the author of the commentary from Ashkenaz on the Shulchan Aruch. The rabbis, like the Chavetz Chaim, like the Vilna Gaon, like the Ramchal, all these rabbis you know of, the Chida, the Ben Ish Chai, they all lived in the generation of the Achronim. What generation do we live in? It's up for discussion. Some people want to say that we are still Achronim. Most critical, cynical rabbis of today consider us Achronei HaAchronim. We're like the end of the end. Like we're done. We're barely nothing compared to the people before us. And it really makes a difference because Achronim are very careful. We don't argue with the Rishonim. We don't fight with the Rambam. We don't have to agree with him, but we won't say he's wrong. We'll follow Rashi instead. That's why we're always teaching the different opinions so we know which one we're following. The Rishonim, they can say whatever they want as long as they're not arguing with the Geonim. The Geonim don't argue with the Savoaim, and the Savoaim don't argue with the Moraim, and the Moraim don't argue with the Tanaim. But we're Jews and we always argue, so there are ways to get around these things. But in general, Rabbi Yoni Halevy lived in a generation where the 400 years before the Talmud had been sealed. That great work that the entire Jewish people accepted upon themselves. That tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu to his student, to his student, to his student, all the way down to today in the year 2012. That discussion as being recorded in the book of the Gemara of the Talmud was sealed. And Rabbi Yoni Halevy worried. He worried that we spent so much time studying halacha, studying Jewish law, studying the details of Judaism, but we forgot a little bit of the philosophy of Judaism, of the way of life Judaism actually wanted us to live. Not just how do we make tea on Shabbat, 3 cups of water, 2 cups of water, half a cup of water, whatever it is we do, but rather, why do we keep Shabbat? What's the idea behind Shabbat? And Rabbi Yoni Halevy is telling us that don't just think that laws, dry Judaism was passed down from generation to generation, but even the ethics of Judaism, the morals of Judaism, the philosophy of Judaism, that was also passed down from Moshe Rabbeinu to his students. And Rabbi Yoni Halevy said, is all I'm doing in this book is writing down what I heard from my father, from my mother, from my rabbis, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. And he's telling us, I didn't write my own things here, because I really didn't. I'm just sharing with you the Judaism that was. And that brings us to our third assumption, our third principle. We've said this maybe 100 times. I'm not exaggerating. Rabbi Yoni Halevy didn't come to convince anyone of anything. He doesn't really care. Simple as that. Rabbi Yoni Halevy is not an apologetic. He doesn't like to rationalize. He doesn't like to make up ideas that will make you feel nice and warm and fuzzy. Rabbi Yoni Halevy couldn't care less. Rabbi Yoni Halevy says, do you want to study Judaism? Do you want to really know what Hashem says? I'll tell you. If you don't want to know, You don't have to study by me. I'm not forcing you anything. And this is a basic fact that you have to know. Rabbi Yehuda Halevy won't sit here and prove to you that Hashem exists. Because Rabbi Yehuda Halevy is assuming that when you come to study this book, you already know that. Because you've already experienced it. Because you've already felt it somewhere in your life. That's perhaps why he starts off with the story of the king having a dream. Because a dream, our rabbis tell us, may be a 60th of the truth. But we say that a person who doesn't dream, the Talmud tells us, is an evil person. A rasha. Because a dream is some sort of connection to that world that we know of Hashem. And therefore someone who dreams has a connection to Hashem. And the king, even though he's asking questions, he's not asking, does Hashem exist? Is it really true? Maybe prove it to me. What he's saying is, I know Hashem is real because I felt him in my life. I've seen him in my life. I've seen Hashem interact with me. All I'm trying to do is to understand now, how do I come closer to him? And Rabbi Yehuda Halevy is assuming that we're reading this book with the same understanding, that Hashem is one, and that Hashem is real. You see, Rabbi Yehuda Halevy's understanding of a Jew is that every Jew is a chilek Eloham Imal, is a little bit of Hashem. And so it might be covered up with a little bit of dirt. We might be a little bit dirty from the world around us. We might not really know exactly what it is that Hashem is, or that we even believe in him in the first place. But Rabbi Yehuda Halevy's belief is, when you start to scratch away at that surface, when a Jew starts to learn a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, they'll discover the truth. Because they are the truth. Because they have that Hashem, that little bit inside of them. And the same thing is true for a non-Jew. Every single human being in this world has what we call in Hebrew philosophy a yesod emuni. It's a basis of belief. Every person in the world has this connection to a higher power. Has this connection to Hashem. Every person, not just Jews. And therefore Rabbi Yehuda Halevy says, even though I'm not here to convince the non-Jews of anything, but I have to at least give them a little bit of a platform to speak, so they can also connect to this book. So that if they wanted to take this journey, like the king of Kuzari did, they would also uncover that truth that's hidden deep inside of them. Because he knows that the truth of Judaism won't dirty the untruths of the non-Jews. It won't make them look bad. But the truth of Judaism is light. And light will just light up the world for them as well. And when they delve into these secrets, when they delve into this Torah, they'll find the truth inside of themselves as well. Perhaps if you'd like to refer the way Rabbi Yehuda Halevy approaches Torah in this book to something we know of our everyday life. How many people in this room have been stopped by somebody before and said, can I talk to you about God? Can I talk to you about that guy? Can I talk to you about something else? Who here has ever been approached by any kind of missionary from any kind of religion? Yeah? Is there anybody who hasn't been approached before? Oh, Hashem. Thank God.
He's honest.
Unless you have bracha, you should never have to do that either. So, it's part and parcel of almost every world religion to convince everybody else that they have the truth. I once had a discussion with a college student, and I said, listen, I don't need you to be Jewish, but if you ask me questions, I'd like to share with you what Judaism has to share. And this person made a conscious decision. They were not going to become Jewish. They're not interested. 613 is a big number. But they are willing to accept the fact that Hashem exists. They're willing to reject any of the other idolatrous understandings of Hashem, just to know that Hashem is God. And I got an email a number of years ago from them. I'm not in touch with them anymore. But these Mormons came to knock on their door. They said, can we speak to you about God or the Bible, whatever they ask you when they knock on the door. And they said, no, I'm sorry, you're wrong. So what do you mean, well, I believe that Judaism is the truth. I said, well, you're not Jewish. I said, I know I'm not Jewish, but it's the truth. And she walked away from them. There is a truth. When you don't have to attack those things that aren't true. It's not nice. It's not derech eretz. We don't need these debates. You know, someone wants to ask me, oh, maybe I'll make you a part of a panel discussion. I don't need to be a part of any panel discussion because that's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to fight against the world. It's not my job. I'm here to share the truth with anyone who's willing to listen. And that's why Jews don't proselytize. 2 reasons. We don't feel like we need to share with everybody unless they want to know. And 2 is that we believe that people can be good without being Jewish. they can go to heaven without being Jewish. It's a basic Jewish belief. Unlike every other religion, that if you don't believe in their religion, I don't know what will happen to you. Nothing, don't worry, but that's what they think. And therefore, when a convert comes to convert, we don't force them to convert. If at any point in time a convert wants to say, listen, I don't want to keep doing this, it's fine. You can go. There's nothing wrong with that, because we don't have any agenda to make anybody Jewish. If someone wants to be Jewish, wants to study Judaism, kol hakavod. If not, also kol hakavod. Do what you like. And therefore, if someone comes and says, oh, what do you think about Aristotle? What do you think about Christianity? I said, listen, I'm not here to teach you about Christianity. If you want to study Christianity, go to a church. Here we're here to discuss Judaism, to talk about the ideas that Hashem set forth to Moshe Rabbeinu in Har Sinai. Maybe we'll finish these three principles with a simple but complicated understanding of philosophy. Kant points this out in his writings as well. You can't really prove anything to anyone. I'm not a philosopher. I don't like philosophy so much. But this is one of those things that you have to know whether you're a philosopher or not. You can't prove anything because at the end of the day, there's always going to be an assumption that everyone has to accept in order for you to have a discussion. I'll share with you what I mean. Unless you have A and B, unless you can already find B and A, you won't be able to prove C. I'll explain to you what I'm saying. A. Sentence A. A human being has eyes. A human being has two eyes. That's our first. That's A. A human being has
two eyes.
Two eyes. The second thing we're saying is Reuven is a human being. That's B, right? Reuven is a human being. What do we now know about Reuven? That he has two eyes. And we also know that Reuven is a human being. But we wouldn't have been able to prove that unless we'd already said in the beginning that a human being is one who has two eyes and that Reuven is a human being. Things are in essence connected to assumptions. There's going to be a basic assumption when you study anything. And our basic assumption is Hashem is God. Hashem exists. He's real. And in order for us to even understand anything that's happening in this book, we have to have that assumption built into our memory. We know that that's true. And only with that assumption in mind can we begin to understand everything else here in the Torah. Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, the rabbi of Germany, he felt very strongly that even if you don't believe that Hashem exists, when you read the Torah, you have to read the Torah the way the Torah was meant to be written. If you read the Torah as if Hashem doesn't exist, it won't make any sense to you. But even if you don't believe it to be true yet, when you read the Torah, you have to read it through the lens of the way the Torah wanted to be read. That there is a Hashem and the book is divine. And that's the way you have to understand the Torah. And therefore, the question could be asked, why are we talking to this king of Kuzari? Is he Jewish? No. Is he thinking of converting? No. What is he doing? He's having a discussion about Judaism. But we don't need to have discussions about Judaism with someone who's not serious about Judaism. So let's answer our question. We said this before. The king of Kuzari already had a revelation. He already had a connection to something supernatural, to something spiritual, to that which we call Hashem. And therefore we know that when Rabbi Yoni Halevy approaches the Kuzari in this book, the king of Kuzar, he already knows that Hashem exists. And we're not here to prove that to him. What we're here is to prove to him beyond your intellect, beyond your knowledge that Hashem exists, what does Hashem want from you in your everyday life? With that being said, we can keep moving. So our three assumptions. One, hitmodedut betoch habayit, we're only discussing issues inside of our own house. Two, that this emunah that Rabbi Yoni Halevy is teaching us goes way back to the times of the Talmud, to our rabbis, and Moshe Rabbeinu in Har Sinai. And the third thing is we really can only explain the Torah from the inside, because someone from the outside won't really get it, because they're missing a basic assumption that Hashem is real, that Hashem is true. Let's read this second paragraph again, number 2. וזכרתי מה ששמעתיו כבר מטענות החבר. And this made me remember the arguments of that rabbi. אשר היה אצל מלך כוזר, which was there in the time of the king of Kuzari. If you notice in the Hebrew, what word did I use for rabbi?
Chaver.
Chaver. That's the word that's used. What does chaver mean?
Friend.
A friend.
Fellow, like a fellow scholar, no?
Well, I mean, it's not a fellow scholar to the king of... The literal translation of chaver is a friend. You're right, also a fellow scholar. Whatever. But why is the word chaver used for rabbi? The term rabbi existed. Harav, hachacham. Why chaver, the friend?
Put someone in equal footing, maybe?
Was he in equal footing with the king of Kuzari?
No.
He was dear to him.
Not yet, not at this point in the book.
And why the translation is rabbi and not friend?
And now, why is it even better? Why do we translate this to mean rabbi? Maybe it just means friend, right?
At the time of the Gemara, the group people were observant, perform a group of chaverim.
Chaverim.
Almost like a kibbutz.
Okay.
Everybody's
So
chaverim.
maybe we'll instead attack the question from a different angle. Let's understand what the word chaver, friend, means in the first place. This is not Monday morning. It's not a relationships with Rabbi Yoni class, but this is important. You have a famous Mishnah. In Pirkei Avot, in the first chapter, the 6th Mishnah. The teaching of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Perachia for a different class and a different time. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Perachia, according to Jewish belief, was the rabbi of Yeshu in the times of the Mishnah. That has ramifications why he taught the Torah that he taught. But Rabbi Yehoshua ben Perachia says, "Ukneh lecha chaver," you have to acquire for yourself a friend. A friend. You have to have a friend. Aser charav, ukneh lecha chaver. You have to make for yourself a rabbi, and you also have to acquire for yourself a friend. An important note, some of the commentators there understand that he uses the word ukneh. What does the word kneh mean in Hebrew?
Bye.
To buy a friend. Friends are so important that even if you don't have one, you should pay somebody to be your friend. There are commentaries of this opinion, because a person who doesn't have friends is going to have a really hard time in life. Important thing to know. Maybe more practically with kids. You see your kids aren't having good friends, give someone else an incentive to be their friend. And Mashallah l'shem shamayim ends up being l'shem shamayim. What they did because you were giving them some kind of incentive sometimes will become a real friendship. It didn't start off that way, but nobody needs to know that except for you. The Rambam has a commentary on Pirkei Avot. It's not printed in most books because it's very short. Because the Rambam has an introduction to Pirkei Avot, which is 8 chapters long. That's more chapters than there are in Pirkei Avot in the first place. And therefore, when it comes to Pirkei Avot, most of what the Rambam says, he writes, I already told you this, I already told you this, I already explained this. And so most of the commentary is not really a commentary, but it's just, I already told you, go look in the original book, and it hasn't been printed as often as it should be. But in the Rambam's commentary of what is a friend, the Rambam says that there are 3 kinds of friends. The first kind of friend is chaver to'elet. A useful friend. Yeah. What is a useful friend?
Need to borrow a car.
Somebody you
Perhaps
use?
in English, a convenient friend.
Convenient.
Yeah, toilet, right? Someone you use, someone that they use you. It's a very superficial relationship. You know people like this. I need a friend. Okay, come on, let's go out for lunch. Or can I borrow something from you? Those kind of friends. That's the most basic level of friendship, says the Rambam. It's not a real friend, but it's a very it's a friendship. There's a Rabbi Orlovsky. He has a class on platonic relationships, whether they really exist. And he's always famous for saying, "Oh, he's just my friend," right? And when girls tell him, "He's just my friend." He's really a friend. Yeah, he's a really good friend. He's a really good friend. Yeah. Let me ask you: if your car broke down at 3 o'clock in the morning in the middle of a snowstorm, and you called this friend up, would he come over to help you? Yeah, right. It's convenient in the middle of the afternoon, on lunch break, maybe they're in the same neighborhood. It's a chaver to'elet. It's a convenient friend. The second level of friendship, says the Rambam, chaver hana'ah. It's a friend which you derive benefit from their friendship. It's a little bit more beneficial, a beneficial friend. There's a convenient friend, a useful friend, and there's a beneficial friend. The second category, chaver hana'ah, is the kind of person who you might consider a good friend. Someone who you are willing to share your thoughts with. Someone that when you have something private but you need to tell somebody, you don't know who to tell that to, so you go to this friend. That's that kind of friend. That's the second level of friendship. The highest level of friendship is chaver ma'aleh. Is that the way I would say it? Yeah. Is a friend who lifts you high. Chaver ma'aleh, a friend that lifts you, says the Rambam, is the highest and most ideal level of friendship. Obviously, you have the first two levels with them. They do you a favor, you do them a favor. You talk to them, they talk to you. But the highest level of friendship, says the Rambam, is a person who's dedicated together with you to grow as a better person, to grow as a better human being, to grow closer to Hashem together. Someone who's a spiritual partner in your life. Says the Rambam, there is no higher friend than the third level of friendship. And I'll tell you the truth. When you're in yeshiva, you have a study partner called a chavruta. Chavruta is a really close relationship. People just the guy you sit with and learn with. And chavrutas are people that you spend anywhere between 4 to 16 hours a day with. People that sit across from you, that you learn everything you learn in Torah, you learn with the chavruta. Sometimes a person will have 2 or 3 chavrutot. They split up their day into 3. My best friends are people who I learned with. The people who I didn't learn Torah with, but were really, really good friends of mine, they're not. I don't keep in touch with them. Those friendships were when they were convenient. They were there when they needed them. Now I'm past that. I'm beyond that. But people come to me sometimes and say, "Oh, Rabbi, what should I do with my spouse, with my husband, with my wife?" Like I have much experience in the matter. And I always say, you should learn Torah with them. Because if you're not learning Torah with them, if you can't have a discussion about where am I as a spiritual being, you're not going to get anywhere with them. Because that friendship will burn out one day. It's close, it's loving, it feels good, but it's not going to be there forever. This actually has halachic ramifications. Some say that 2 people who are just dating should not learn Torah together. Because it's the most intimate connection that 2 people can have. There are such halachic ramifications. Rabbi Yochanan, the famous Rabbi Yochanan, one of the big rabbis of the Jewish people, had a chavruta whose name was Resh Lakish. What does Resh Lakish mean? He was the head of the armed robbers. Resh Lakish was a bandit. He was an armed robber. That's what he was. He ran around mugging people on the streets, ambushing wagons that were traveling. That's what Resh Lakish did. And one day, in a story that is not for right now, Resh Lakish decides to go to the Beit Midrash and to learn with Rabbi Yochanan. The incentive was that he wanted to marry Rabbi Yochanan's sister. And they became chavrutot. And not just chavrutot, but they became the best friends. And Resh Lakish became one of the greatest rabbis that ever lived in the Jewish people. And he never changed his name, or we never stopped calling him the head of the bandits. And it's a message, by the way, for us, those people who perhaps are Balei Tshuva, or people who even converted, or people who their past is perhaps not who they were today. People sometimes are embarrassed of their past. They're a little bit shy of their past. They don't want to share their past. According to Judaism, it's a beautiful thing that a person was where they were, and this is where they are today. In real Judaism. I can't promise you that the Jewish world feels the same way, but in real Judaism, it's something very important. To be able to say, I used to be a bandit, and today I'm a big rabbi. So call me Rabbi Bandit. Yeah, like it's a special thing. When Resh Lakish passed away, and he was famous for when he studied the Rabbi Yochanan, everything that Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Yochanan was the chief rabbi, everything he said, Resh Lakish said, you're wrong. I don't agree with you. No, you have to prove it to me. Make your point, you're not making a good enough point. Yeah, you'll see this when you walk into a yeshiva. It's really noisy in the yeshiva because people are screaming at each other. You're wrong, you can't be right. They're throwing books at each other. Why? Because it's part of discovering the truth is to know how to fight against the truth. And Rabbi Yochanan, at a certain point in time, lost his chavruta. He passed away. And Rabbi Yochanan set out to find a new chavruta. And everyone who learned with him, imagine you're the chief rabbi, right? And you get some new guy to start learning with you. What do you think he's going to say every time you say something?
Nobody can predict him.
Yeah, oh, of course you're right. This is great. I'm going to start doing that too, right? That's how people treat their rabbis sometimes. And Rabbi Yochanan just couldn't handle it. He kept getting rid of one chavruta, getting a new one, getting rid of another one. Fight with me! No, you're right, Rabbi. How can I fight with you? And this kept happening to him. Until Rabbi Yochanan stood up and said, O chavruta, O mituta. It's the famous line. Either give me a good chavruta or just kill me. The ending of the story is not a happy one. Yeah? It's a classic Jewish story. And Hashem says, okay, I can't find a good chavruta for you. But the highest relationship you can have with a person is to know that this person is dedicated 100% to my spiritual growth. And I'm dedicated 100% to their spiritual growth. Abraham and Sarah, they were both in the same mission. To change the world, to transform the world, and they did it together because Abraham without Sarah wouldn't be able to have all those guests over in his house. And Sarah without Abraham wouldn't have someone there teaching the men Torah like Abraham was doing. It was a relationship that one needed the other one. And therefore says Rabbi Yoni Halevy that the proper term for a rabbi is a chaver, someone who's a friend, someone who's looking out for my spiritual well-being. That's why they tell me the things that they tell me. They're really looking out for me. They want me to grow. Why else would they share these things with me? And I want to grow as well. And therefore they're called my chaver, my friend. This custom continued in Germany until this generation, until this last generation. In Germany, when a rabbi received ordination, and to receive smicha as a rabbi in Germany, you had to know the entire Talmud by heart. Yeah? After which you had to learn all of the poskim, Shulchan Aruch, Rambam, everything. And then they would give you smicha, but you were not allowed to use the title rabbi. You didn't deserve the title rabbi yet. Harav. They called him chaver. You were just a friend. Not everyone could be called your friend. The rabbi was your friend. And somewhere around the age of 60, 70, 80, when the elder rabbis of the generation started, they would take the most learned of all those chaverim and call him, you're now called harav. And if you go to traditional German shuls, there's one in Washington Heights, they don't call the rabbi rabbi. They call him chaver. But the term chaver is deeper than that. Someone who cares about my spiritual well-being is in the highest fulfillment of the mitzvah, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love a fellow like you love yourself, because all they want is to make your life better. And the word chaver was used on purpose, because that's what the Kuzari is trying to do. He's trying to find someone who's going to care so much about him that he's willing to transform his life. And that's what Rabbi Yoni Halevy is doing. Not just did he transform the life of the king of Kuzari, but even here in the year 2012, so many years later, we're learning the Torah of Rabbi Yoni Halevy, which is transforming B'ezrat Hashem our life as well.
Would you mention what is the root of the word chaber?
Please?
Lechaber.
To connect. The word chaver, very nice. The word chaver and the word to connect in Hebrew have the same three-letter root.
It's not like a friend in English. Chaber in Hebrew means actually a connection to somebody else.
I want to share with you a story, because the next piece that I want to do is going to take too long for tonight's class. And there are people who make a mistake. They learn Torah fast. And I call them, they don't ever learn Torah, they just read Torah. It's one thing to read, it's another thing to learn. These 2 paragraphs that we just read, I spent about 4 hours today taking notes on. I'm not exaggerating. Yeah. I'm sharing with you as like the tip of the iceberg, because if I had to share with you everything here, we would be here until Kabbalat Shabbat tomorrow. And because not everything is to be shared, some things could be retained, and we'll share them at the proper time. I just want you to know that when we come back next time, God willing, we may be stuck on the same 2 paragraphs, but we're not stuck there. We're not willing to just read them, we're learning them. We're understanding what every word here means, what every detail is. I want to share with you a story about what true friendship is. This is a story about the Kotzker Rebbe. Come on, Kotzker Rebbe. Yeah, almost every class of mine will hear a Kotzker Rebbe. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotzk and Rabbi Yitzchak of Vorka, otherwise known as Rabbi Yitzchak Vorker. The Kotzker Rebbe and Rabbi Yitzchak were best friends. Although their ideologies and their ideas of what Judaism was supposed to look like and feel like and smell like were completely different. The Kotzker Rebbe could not handle people who were liars. He was just that truth. Everything was the truth. Emet ve'emunah, true. He couldn't handle liars. So much so, and I've shared this many times before, the last 19 years of his life he disappeared, and he ran to his office and he locked himself in there for 19 years, because he felt that even his chassidim, who were like the truest of the true, because their Rebbe was all about the truth, his chassidim were considered a bunch of liars to him as well. He just couldn't handle even the slightest bit of a lie. The Kuzari Rebbe was famous for saying, I don't care how you dress, I don't care how you, I just care what are you? Do you know who you are? He was famous for his line of saying that a wicked person who knows that he's wicked and is willing to admit that he's wicked is closer to Hashem than a person who's a tzaddik, a righteous person, who's not willing to admit that they do bad sometimes. Because at least the wicked person is honest. He tells the truth. Rabbi Yitzchak Vorker, on the other hand, was the exact opposite. His midah, what he was known for was Ahavat Yisrael, loving every single Jew, regardless of how they were, regardless of how they acted, regardless of what they believed. He loved everybody. They were best friends, though, because real friends know that they could disagree, but they could still be best friends. Because I don't have to hate you; I can just dislike your ideas, and that's something that most people don't know how to do today. Rabbi Yitzchak Vorker made a very close relationship with Rav Menachem Mendel. And when Menachem Mendel passed away, his son was very bothered. Rav Mendele, the son of Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kutsk, was known as the Silent Rebbe. When the Kutsk Rebbe's son would give over speeches in Torah, you know what the room sounded like? He would go like this. For hours. He never spoke. He had thousands of Hasidim who never heard him say a word. He was known as the Rebbe HaShotek, the quiet Rebbe. And people learned so much from his silence. Now you have to be like in totally different worlds to like be there, right? But Rav Mendel was very bothered because a few weeks after his father had passed away, he still had him come and visited him from Gan Eden, from the next world, and it really bothered him. Now, for us, in the next world, this world, they're like two separate worlds. For tzaddikim, it's the same place. And he was really bothered that his father had never come back to visit him. So he decided that he's going to set out to Rabbi Yitzchak Vorka and say, listen, Rabbi, maybe you met my father somewhere. Maybe he came to you in a dream. And Rabbi Yitzchak says, he didn't come talk to me either. I'm also very worried about him. And Rabbi Yitzchak says, I'll do something called an aliyat neshama. I'll take my soul out of my body, and I'll go to the next world, and I'll go look for your father, and I'll come back and tell you what's going on with him. Now, we always say, even if the story isn't true, they don't tell stories like this about you and me, right?
Right.
There's certain people who get these kind of stories told about them. Rabbi Yitzchak Vorka goes up to Shamayim, and he meets his angel and starts asking questions. Do you know where Rav Menachem Mendel of Kutsk is? They don't know. He was here, but he left. And he enters the house of Avraham Avinu, and there's people learning Torah. Avraham says, he was here, but he moved on to the next house, to Yitzchak's house. Then goes to Yitzchak's house, and to Yaakov's house. Everyone says, listen, he was here, but he kept moving. And he ends up in the house of the Rambam and of Rashi. And they say he was here too, but he kept going. And finally, he reaches the edge of a forest. A scary forest, a dark forest. And an angel says, I saw the Kutsk Rebbe go in that direction. And Rabbi Yitzchak Vorka starts walking through this forest. He's walking, and it's dark, and it's scary. And he finally reaches the other side. And he hears this crazy noise, this loud, shrieking sound. And he sees this huge ocean in front of him. And this huge ocean is spread out. And he sees the Kutsk Rebbe is looking out into the ocean. He's leaning on his staff, and he's just staring out into space. And he says, Menachem Mendel, I've been looking for you. Where have you been? He says, I've been right here the whole time. He says, well, why haven't you come and visited? He said, I'm not leaving. He said, what do you mean you're not leaving? What are you doing here? This is not even the right place for you to be. And Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kutsk says, Yitzchak, do you know what this is? He said, I don't know what it is. What is this? And he says, this is the ocean. It's the ocean of tears. The tears of the Jewish people in every generation. When people try to kill them. When people try to destroy them. when people try to convert them, when people try to wipe them out, to throw them from one country to another country, from their land, to destroy their temple. These are the tears that every Jew has cried. And they're here and they're screaming and they're crying. They want Hashem to answer them. And I, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, I'm going to stand here at this ocean. I'm not going to leave until Hashem fulfills the verse, Umacha Hashem Elohim dimam al kol panim, that Hashem will wipe off the tears from every human being's face. I'm not leaving, and I'm going to stand here until that happens. And according to Kotsk legacy, the Kotsk Rebbe is still standing. He's still there. He's waiting for the tears to stop. There's no closer friendship than people who are not just friends in this world, but even in the next world can visit each other, can speak with each other. And there's no closer connection between a rabbi and his people than someone who's not willing to go to the house of the Rambam, to Rashi, to Avram Avinu. But he's going to stand there and worry about the Jewish people and take care of their tears for as long as it's necessary. Because he's a true chaver, he's a true friend of the Jewish people. And bless us all. That we know what it means to be real friends, to be true friends, to worry about each other not just in this world but in the next, to be able to connect with each other. It doesn't have to be the next, but at least in this world we should connect with each other. And to find a rabbi, to find someone that we connect to, someone who's our friend, someone who looks out for us in a spiritual fashion. Until Hashem listens to the cries, we've had enough. Hashem, we've had enough. How much of this can we take? How many more wars can we take? How many more rockets can we handle? We're done. We're sick and tired. We just want to go home. Bezat Hashem, the learning of the Kuzari that we learned tonight in the sake of our soldiers. They should be strong. Hashem should watch over them, should protect them. They should go in peace. They should come back in peace.
Amen.
That nobody should die on either side. That Hashem should just make everyone realize what His plan is in the world, what His Mashiach is in the world, what His understanding of that day where the whole world will realize that Vaya Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad, that Hashem's name is one and that His nation is one and that we're one and the whole world is one. And Bezat Hashem, when we know that, He'll fulfill the pasuk. Lo yisa goy el goy charev. The people won't lift swords to each other anymore. V'lo yilmedu od ish milchama. People won't study anymore the art of war because there'll be no more war to study. Bezat Hashem should happen soon. What we'll do right now, Bezat Hashem, is I'll hand out these papers. We'll stand up. And that together with me, I'll say and you'll repeat after me, we'll accept upon ourselves Ol Malchut Shamayim, that Hashem is one, Hashem is the King. Bezat Hashem, these merits should watch over our learning and bring blessing and joy into our life as well. Bezat Hashem. So if we could just hand these out. We'll say them together. There's more going on. Everyone have one?
Yes, sir. There.
Just one to stay?
Is
Is it just one
Repeat
page?
after me, Bezat Hashem.
The extra one right here.
It's okay for women to say it with us also. It's a prayer. It's not considered a song. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Shema
Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Adonai hu Elohim, Adonai hu Elohim.
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 Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai imloch leolam vaed.
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 Ana Adonai Hoshiana, Ana Adonai Hoshiana.
Adonai Hoshiana, Adonai Hoshiana.
Ana Adonai Yatzlichana, Ana Adonai Yatzlichana.
Adonai Yatzlichana, Adonai Yatzlichana.
To bless us all, B'ezrat Hashem, we should have a beautiful Shabbat and a wonderful week. I'm going out of town on Sunday for 2 weeks, so we're not going to have a class not next Thursday or the Thursday after that, but God willing, the Thursday after that I believe is
The third.
not the 3rd, that's the Monday. That's probably the 6th. This one, that makes sense.
Send an email.
The next class we'll send an email, is going to be December the 6th, B'ezrat Hashem. So I will miss you all, but we'll be learning together. Please come back. Please let those people who weren't here today know that we'll be meeting again on December 6th, B'ezrat Hashem. Everyone have a beautiful Shabbat.
Thank you.
Thank you.